We're all stressed and overwhelmed, and there doesn't seem to be enough hours in the day. I'll delve into the reasons why we must never stop learning and how that helps us build stronger foundations and an overall stronger hat rack that we can then hang all our hats on without it ever tumbling over. This episode deals with all the responsibilities that we take on day to day in our lives, how we deal with and cope with them, and how we can ensure a stronger foundation to help us better deal with all these responsibilities. I'll talk about ideas and tricks to make your lives easier in future episodes too. This is more an academic approach to understanding ourselves in relation to the various roles we take on and why, in the end, we're all just human hat racks. We're going to be talking about education, training, learning, and evolving. Or, more accurately, this one's about how people mock education and why that's causing a huge breakdown in our social fabric. The death of expertise is a foundational tactic to cementing a fascist society. When we, the people, are complacent with our learning and demonizing others who aren't, then ignoring experts for the sake of pride, ego, and cultism,
society will be doomed!
And welcome to the podcast. I have a personal rule of interpersonal interactions, not debating anyone anymore. I stopped that a long time ago, sadly, before I even got on TikTok. It seems that particular social media hub is the perfect breeding ground for unproductive socio-political discourse. In that, all you need is 1,000 followers and you can turn your camera on anytime you want and say and do whatever you want until someone gets their feelings hurt. Literally anyone can have a platform for their ideas today, which is both a good thing and one of the worst things our society has experienced. I don't debate. And that rule is pretty hypocritical and self-serving because I will talk to some people. And it isn't that they agree with me. I welcome those who don't. It's just that I insist on a standard of agreed upon facts before I interact with someone. So while it kind of is that I won't debate someone who disagrees with me, those disagreements are about fascism and the validity of elections, insurrections, domestic terror, nationalism, etc. Look, I refuse to speak with anyone who doesn't come to the table in good, earnest, factual faith. I sacrifice one of my strongest gifts in a significant social media growth strategy for the sake of my own mental peace. Seriously, scroll TikTok lives, even YouTube. I'm sure, I don't know. Watch the interaction between different styles or types of discourse or debate. You'll see hundreds of people watching a lefty verbally eviscerate a conservative to ideological shreds, humiliating their lack of education with facts and truth that feelings and conspiracy theories can't dispute. Except that nothing new is being said. Very few people are changing their minds. It's just noise for noise's sake. It's getting a lot of reaction and the algorithm love for those involved, but at what cost? What's the cost for your algorithm, and what is the cost for you personally? It's almost like TikTok looked at the Facebook feeds and local media comment sections and said, how can we make this a game? I find those sorts of for entertainment purposes only debates in poor faith. In one regard, many like-minded viewers will see that and feel some much-needed validation. I'm just not sure how much of that we need at this point. Fascism versus the rest of the world and all, you know? And others it agitates and gets them sort of in a more attitudinally aggressive place. It's not much more different than the mood difference you might experience in someone who binged all Fast and Furious movies versus binging Little House on the Prairie. Where do we want our baseline? You know, as a voice actor and audio guy, I look at things like peaks and valleys, you know? Sometimes I start like this and my voice kind of trails off when I speak naturally. I emphasize certain words and phrases, and when I look at it in an audio waveform, it's a nightmare to edit and master, you know? Our moods are similar in these peaks and valleys. When things are loud, it distorts and overmodulates, and it's really hard to experience. But when it's soft, you might have to turn it the stuff around you down just to hear the words so you lose their attention. Let's say you work with people, customer service, or whatever other nightmare you might have to endure for less than your worth. Let's say before work, you're spending about 2 hours playing a really aggressive and amped up video game, or you're playing something creative and collaborative online with others. Maybe you're fighting by yourself against other random players of the game, make-believe people, blowing them to smithereens in one game, but maybe in the other, you're building and working as a team to accomplish a common creative goal. My argument is that there is a difference in the after effects. I know this has to be true with most people just from the science of brain development and how all that stuff works. Honestly, a lot of this is rooted in the brain science we don't know yet, what we don't understand about the brain. So I choose a life of peace and no debating. Why? Am I afraid to be wrong? Afraid of getting backed into a corner? No. I simply haven't heard anything new or compelling from my ideological opposition in about 25 years. In fact, every conclusion I've come to, because I've sought out to prove or disprove an idea that I already had or one that I questioned, not because one of them came to me and said something that made me think. That hasn't happened in a long time. The biggest issue here is that these people don't debate fairly. They don't acknowledge expertise. They don't yield when proven wrong. Their feelings are facts and their facts are false, and anything you show them won't change their minds. Nothing you show them will change their minds. These are people whose minds are made up and cannot be changed. Follow me here, because this part's important. I've had thousands of conversations and discussions with conservatives. Over the time, I was drifting away from republicanism and opening my eyes to the lies and cult-like brainwashing and manipulation to which those on the right are vulnerable. So much so that I've sort of been studying them the whole time. For this, why are they vulnerable to cultism? Why are we vulnerable to cultism? Is what I'm answering throughout this entire first part of Overthinking Everything. And I'm using every interaction I've ever had with these people as research and evidence. A huge part of that answer, why are we susceptible to cultism, is education. Education, mental health, and learning challenges, diversity, life experience, perspective, critical thinking. These are areas where I've found the greatest chasms of relatability and similarity between people with a more left-leaning sociopolitical ideology and those who lean more right. Other areas where I've discovered there are significant deficiencies on the right are in areas of integrity, ethics, morals, and character, empathy and compassion, humanity, pragmatism. In fact, these areas I mentioned are among my most treasured, revered, and sacrosanct values. In that, as someone whose path has led him to the attempted practice of Stoicism, intellectualism, wisdom, learning, understanding, knowing, these are the most important areas of the human experience. In that, it's hard for me to respect someone who bashes education. Doesn't matter who they are. You can knock the cost, you can criticize the structure and institution of it, how courses are arranged and the standards and hoops you gotta jump through. We can and should scrutinize things about the process of getting an education, but listen closely to what people say when they do criticize it. Are they actually criticizing getting an education? Most of them are. Listen. That's become one of those social norms I discussed in the previous episode on cancel culture. A cultism of willful ignorance and pride. We mock and denigrate the stuff that's too hard for us. In America, we're almost conditioned that getting a higher education or even paying attention in high school is a waste of time and money with no professional paycheck payoff. Go to trade school and be a good American and learn how to work harder instead of working smarter. Except that in all my years, I've rarely seen the craftsmanship and work ethic out of a tradesperson and laborer whom I've hired that's been worth them foregoing that learning. In that, the people who've done work for me largely have been just as shitty at their hard work and trade school job as they are at being human beings, because they never learned how to do anything but do the thing that they have to do to make a living, or whatever. Well, except for those I've hired who didn't originate in America, I'll say that's usually a much different standard. Sounds elitist and classist, doesn't it? It is, but not by me, by our society. Our society should educate and train. Why are we making people pick between twisting a wrench and being smarter? Yes, school makes you smarter than not going at all. You don't get to debate that. I'm sorry if you feel inadequate, and I'm sorry if I have to be the dick to say this, but learning more makes one smarter. Knowing more makes one smarter. If one knows more than another, the one who took the time to read, learn, and know is smarter than the person who didn't. That is the fact. Stop that nonsense debate and yield to those with more expertise. That's a step of ego and pride many are not willing to take. But from another perspective, why are we denying the trade school kid the opportunity for a well-rounded education? Why do we feel like that kid is less worthy of being a good, decent, smart person just because they want to fill in the blank with whatever fill in the blank tool? I don't know, people. I hire people to do the work I can't do. I yield to experts, or I try. We've corrupted the learning and self-betterment of education with the profit promise of a good job that just doesn't exist anymore. That has affected our perspective on learning, sadly. But the fact is, if you didn't go to school and learn, however smart you might be, you don't get to say you're as smart as someone who did. You might have a natural aptitude and critical thinking skills that save you from falling into a cult, but you still don't get to criticize someone who knows more than you, and you certainly should check your ego before questioning people who did the academic work. But why do we have to choose a path? Trade school should just be a thing kids have or choose. Pick a trade, any trade. You graduate high school certified in that trade, every kid. You've been working on it since 7th grade. You're damn near a pro at that craft at 18 years old. You also graduate academically ready to go to your mandatory 2 years of college while you serve the next 2 years in a sort of National Guard/community service hybrid program that isn't a path to mandatory military service, but rather structured and disciplined service to your communities. From there, you're out either into the real world or off to university. Military service is an interesting point here. Many believe a mandatory draft would help fix entitled and unrealistic young people. As a pacifist and proud anti-fascist, the idea of mandatory military service is offensive on many levels, compounded by the fact that with those I've met who have military experience, I'm not convinced at all it's a positive path for anyone with a mind of their own or a sense of empathy and compassion. Do not be offended by that, please. The people who have those traits and chose the military path have struggled from my experience. We need the people who don't feel and think like that on the front lines, to make those hard calls, and the people who we need people to make the hard calls, to follow orders. I couldn't do that. I would have gotten myself or others hurt or worse. Somebody gives me an order, I question it and wonder why. You don't need Mr. Critical Thinker here in the platoon. You need someone who will bark, "Sir, yes, sir," and shoot the boomstick without hesitation. I mean no disrespect, just an understanding of roles and the various hats we each wear. Mine does not need to be that kind of hat. I wouldn't wear it well, it wouldn't fit on my head, and it would drag my hat rack to the floor. Now, others couldn't imagine their lives without that hat on their hat rack. To each their own. Different is not lesser than. Sometimes I'm critical of people who can just turn that shit on and off, or those who just don't have it at all, but I commend that in the sense that I know what my strengths and weaknesses are, and in establishments where those traits are considered a strength, I am a huge weakness. I personally don't consider those traits strengths necessarily, so I can easily compartmentalize that someone else or another establishment might value those skills or psychological traits over mine, and I won't be upset about that. As I spoke about in Finding Faith and Divine Redefined, I seek balance. For every thinker, there has to be the executioner of that idea. For every leader, you must have an army of followers. We are all reliant on another in this system. But still, military should not be mandatory because military isn't for everyone. Education is, should be, can be, and would be. With my new reimagined educational philosophy for America, there would be some things about this new National Guard community service hybrid organization that would instill the important things like routine, discipline, goal setting, and order into a young person's life. For example, bed making is something I think is lost on children today. Now, I couldn't make a bed properly with a gun held to my head. I never paid attention to the skill. I can put sheets on, I can make a bed, but not like the right way. It's unimportant to me. I'm just getting back in there later. I don't like wasting time. Except that the philosophy of making your bed every morning is one that harkens to psychology and brain science of resetting your peace, rest, and recovery area every morning, first thing, so that when you are ready for rest, you can just go rest. When a friend of mine with a military background tried arguing with me on the validity of bed making, I initially balked until he issued his point. That it isn't making your bed with the tight, crisp corners and angles required by the military. It's just the discipline of waking up every day and making your bed. That's when I realized the difference between me just leaving my bed the way I get out of it and even me just flattening out my sheet and comforter over my bed. I make my bed my way, and it speaks to a lesson I've learned so many times in my life. An organized and tidy living area causes less stress and anxiety. There's a lot our military can teach us besides imperialism, murder, and aggression. There's the value, in a lot of discipline, order, and routine of that life that would benefit children, all of us, exponentially. The nobility and honor. This new hybrid would be an organization that wouldn't deploy for defense or security, but instead would stay home and handle domestic National Guard-like duties of helping in a disaster or crisis. Our National Guard does a lot, and I envision this organization being something less military, but still having some path to it if someone chose. The actual National Guard or other branches, but mostly being like a grown-up Boy or Girl Scouts, but not nearly as creepy as a grown adult doing that. And no cookie sales. At 20 years old, the average American kid would already have a high school diploma, an associate's degree, a certification in a trade, and enough community service hours to make them a decent human being. If you think you can be a good person without being of service to others in some way, I'm open to hearing that fairy tale theory. But so far, I'm convinced that's a big part of the human experience. Imagine how different America, rural and urban, and everything in between would look. Then maybe having a debate on TikTok wouldn't be as grueling and boring. Seriously, in the few TikTok lives I've done where I've had someone from the other side in the box as a guest, and you could just see it in my face and my body language. I'm so fucking bored. I loathe it. There's nothing I detest more than, especially in interpersonal interactions, than having to speak to a conservative. Remember those self-fulfilling prophecies of toxic interactions that I've spoken about? How when you're already a racist, walking into a building with a foreign-born person speaking broken English is almost guaranteed to go negatively because you're not coming to the table in good faith. Well, this is that same thing, except this bigotry is statistically significantly justified, or at least more so. It's that eventually at some point that conservative will display some trait, thought, or idea that harkens back to some of those deal-breaker traits I mentioned earlier, those that separate the two sides of socio-political American ideology. It isn't that I'm waiting for them to say something stupid, and so I end up getting angry at something they say that isn't. It's just that if you wait long enough, and it usually isn't long at all, they say something stupid. I've just no more patience for that. If I had patience for people on a 6th grade reading level and a 9th grade education, I would be a classroom teacher with my degrees and certifications. I have no desire to spend my days and nights trapped in a prison of ignorance and half-thought. If I can't wrap my head around trying to teach children who aren't as much to blame for their shitty personalities as their shittier parents are, then how do you expect me to teach their shittier parents? Well, that's how I feel in these debates. I'm teaching for free to middle schoolers who have no more inclination to accept me as a learned expert authority on which I'm speaking than they did their actual teachers who all along the way failed in teaching them anything. They didn't listen the first time. I'm not wasting my time interacting with them. They can watch my content, listen, learn, grow, heal, and come back to contribute to the conversation when they're intellectually ready for the conversation. This is why I go all dick mode when someone challenges me. I tell them to go away, get at least a master's degree in a related field to the subject at hand, and then come back to me when they do. I will actually tell someone they aren't allowed to speak to me unless they match my academic credentials in some of these cases. Because it's arrogant and narcissistic to have the opportunity to learn from an expert and then tell that person who spent his life learning the answers to the questions you're asking that you know more than the expert because you saw it on Fox News. This trend in public discourse is difficult. For me, conversation, debate, discourse, it's an art. And I can't say the social scientist in me hasn't purposefully driven a discussion in a certain direction once or twice just to see where it can go. In fairness, I've studied human communication in one manner or another most of my life. I'm a student of the human condition, a social scientist, and academically it's all come full circle. The sociology, the theology, the theater, the actual communication courses I've taken, the psychology, even probability and statistics, it's all led up to having a lot of different perspectives, lenses through which I filter data. And often when I'm engaging with someone, social media or face-to-face, I'm almost certainly studying them. I'm watching for body language and certain phrasing that reveals more than you really think or want. I can usually size up with whom I'm speaking simply by how they communicate with me. Humans are fascinating creatures. They communicate in so many different ways. The ways humans communicate are natural, but sometimes those ways come from various roles we play in our daily lives. Those roles, these subtle communication styles, they all have to do with many of the things I've mentioned in this segment. Laying a foundation on the importance of education, I've hopefully highlighted some of the areas in which our current paradigm is insufficiently ill-preparing young people for the harsh, unfair, and unrealistic realities of this world and what could potentially await them when they're our ages. Training and education are our preparation to take on the roles we play in life. Those are the bodybuilding, fitness, and strength building that makes our back and neck muscles strong enough to wear all the hats and carry so much of those responsibilities. Take it from a spinal cord trauma survivor. Weak back makes it hard to carry anything. We have to be as prepared as we can be because, as we're about to find out, we wear a lot of hats. When I say that I read people and see their aura, surely someone will come up to me and ask, "What do you read in me?" Or something like I'm some sort of fortune teller or medium. I'm not. I'm an extra large for now, working on it. I'm just saying that there's an instinct to reading people and then there's the actual study of it. I have a little of both. In some ways that sounds judgmental, and I assure you it is. I mean, I'd love to take the high road, but I've spent years, most of my life, making fun of people, strangers in public, talking to myself, telling myself their little stories in my own head with my friends or whatever. I've analyzed other people. I had siblings, but I also kind of grew up as an only child. So entertaining myself was a skill I learned quick. I learned a lot about the observation of others. People have these tells, these gives that reveal themselves, who they are, what they are. And that's not easy to figure out all the time. You see, no one is just one thing. We all wear many hats and embody many different roles to many different people in our daily life. This is why judging others too harshly for the things that are on the surface isn't the best practice. They say you never know what someone is dealing with, and that isn't always trauma or a struggle. Sometimes it's just that people have got too much on their plate as human beings. When I talk about observing people the way I do, and have for the purpose of this season's theme of deconstructing a culture of cultism, breaking down my own toxic white Southern culture, I brought up how all these subjects I've studied coalesced into this kaleidoscope of perspective for a reason. No one area that I've studied adequately answers my questions. I need a toolbox to figure this social nightmare out. First, before we get too much into the actual reason for this episode, let's discuss the lenses, the perspectives. In life, we wear many roles. We play many hats. Wait, stop. Switch that. We play many roles. We wear many hats. Sure would be neat to play a hat, though. From an actor standpoint. I'm not doing that. Think of yourself like a human hat rack, and each role you play is a different style of hat. Actually do this. Take a moment and just think of those various different roles. Indulge me. You're the one listening to this thing. Play along. Or why are you here? Are you a mom? What kind of hat does mom wear? A worker? What kind of hat does work you wear? A brother? A leader? Are you a student? Break it down to all the roles. Housekeeper, accountant, maintenance. Remember? The thing that went around, you see it sometimes in Mother's Day cards. How much is mom's salary? How much it should be? Think of yourself the same way. I'll bet you sure as hell don't pay yourself accordingly. You're your own employee after all. You are your personal assistant. Dave Ramsey, regardless of anything else, gives some solid advice where money is concerned. Unrealistic as hell, doesn't accommodate for the corrupt American capitalism, but still, in principle, Ramsey does make some good points. Pay yourself first. My generation can hardly afford to. Capitalism and savings do not go hand in hand, but we need to do this, though. Remember that, it'll be important. Not to my show, but to you. Seriously, it's just a PSA. Pay yourself first. But we wear all these hats, playing different roles. Your hat rack must have a wide base with at least 4 legs. Any fewer, and you risk a topple. This is called balance. I'm not saying you're a failure without this balance. I'm saying balance ensures you have the strongest foundation on which to stack all these hats you're going to wear in life. This foundation, education. Full disclosure, despite my personal rants on the subject, I don't believe college is right for everyone the way our system is currently set up, but I have radical ideas when it comes to education reform in this country, as I laid out in the beginning, how a 20-year-old should be prepared for this world. I believe we're seeing the effects of years' worth of shuffling the social sciences to the background as far as testing and standards go. In fact, we've accepted this broad category of learning to be called social studies instead of social sciences. We've gaslit ourselves for generations that this isn't a serious topic and isn't on par with things like English, math, science, writing. Writing is the major focus of a lot of these standardized tests, which is something I do agree on. However, a society that doesn't study history is doomed to repeat it. And we're there. And college is one path. In defense of college, I believe it to be a path of a broader and more diverse range of more plentiful offerings, academically and socially. And I believe college to be the primary driving force of research and reasoning. In that, while we all may loathe the research paper, it teaches us to not only form the opinion, but to justify, defend, and validate it through extensive research, citing every source immaculately, and organizing that data into a clear and concise thought. Trade school doesn't do that. If you choose the non-college path in the game of life, the onus is on you to make up that learning. And that rarely happens in a society that demonizes learning and celebrates getting done with learning as fast as possible and never looking back. Researching an opinion and being able to justify it with facts, I believe, is a huge missing piece to our socio-intellectual atmosphere today. I guess what I'm saying is I can talk about a lot of things, but I still pay a guy to come fix my drain. I just don't feel like the guy who fixes my drain always does a great job and could have maybe used some of that time to crack a civics textbook once in a while. But this isn't about a college or high school or GEDs or degrees or diplomas that don't really mean much of anything outside of an accomplishment. Now, some of the smartest people in my personal sphere succeeded to incredible heights with barely a GED. I began as a kid who didn't give a crap about high school and was so resentful having to grow up in that dead little town I barely even tried. And when I got to college, community college, mind you, I found that my lackadaisical ambivalence would cost me at least a semester in remedial courses to catch up. In high school, I found the easiest way out, the path of least graduational resistance. I took a lot of home ec classes. They call those family and consumer sciences now. And that's a subject I would love to teach. Got experience as a house husband and work from home entrepreneur. But college became serious business. I wanted to be a teacher that would engage kids like me who didn't give a damn. I wanted to reach people, change people. Granted, I ended up on another professional path and didn't get the teaching degree until I was 40, but still. These hats we wear are filters of perspective. They're only as strong as that little knobby arm thing that holds the hat up on the hat rack. In that, our base needs to have these 4 legs to balance out. But in order to hold a specific hat and some of the roles we play, the hats we wear, well, some of those are heavier than others. We have to have that strong arm, if you will. Let's say your professional role is as a foreman, where the safety of others is in your hands. So maybe you have 3 legs. We'll get to that in a moment. But if you didn't pursue that 4th leg, post-secondary education, well, maybe you may not be as prepared for that responsibility and your arm is a little weaker. Well, let's say you're behind in your training at work. That heavy hard hat that bears the weight of all those lives may slip. And with it, inevitably, all those other hats will fall. This is where priorities or hat stacking comes in. Now imagine this hat rack. A tall coat rack type stand with 4 legs at the base, a tall stand with multiple arms stretching out over a few different levels as it rises, a Christmas tree of headgear. Now, what hat do you put on top? And what hat do you put on bottom? Most of us don't take the time to prioritize the roles we play in life. This is where your husband ends up spending too much time with his friends or your sister can't hold down a job. We have a great deal of thought to put into how we stack our hats. As I said before, if one fails or falls, it's going to take out what's beneath it. However, like your work hat, it needs to be higher priority, as that's how you support your family. It's a personal balancing act. For those who have children, that mommy and daddy hat, usually on the very top. And our other hats, PTO, scout leader, project leader, Sunday school teacher, volunteer, social media agitator, these come and go, and we fit them in where we can. But putting some thought into yourself as a human hat rack and how you stack your respective hats, it's a valuable exercise. If you have a better analogy, I'm happy to hear it and maybe steal it. Be inspired by it. So let's talk about the balance. 4 legs, right? Because 4 legs offer a better spread of the weight distribution than 3. However, a flat round base, a well-rounded foundation, if you will, is the most stable. How do you get there? Just a minute. When we start to examine human development and how the human mind and spirit sort of form and coalesce into who we end up being, there are some specific areas where we want to look at as our foundation. First, early childhood. Through early childhood, birth through school age, kindergarten specifically, we're absorbing so much and our bodies and minds are developing at exponential rates. So the truth goes with trauma that because traumatic events are so impacting, the results will manifest as ripple effects throughout our lives. There's only so much we can do about that. Therapy and processing help, but there are things we can do to heal. And through healing, we can begin to process data appropriately. If you've experienced trauma, specifically in early childhood, that's going to come back to bite you if you don't deal with it. And while trauma is trauma regardless of age, early childhood traumas can really set us back from the start. But with one of our legs being early childhood, getting that right stimulation and atmosphere is absolutely integral for a child's development. It is, after all, where most of our foundational learning takes place. Early childhood development is a science unto itself, and having achieved the academic goals I have, I'm not convinced I'm equipped to teach children below a certain age or development level. It's different when it's your own child, reading to her, but many parents don't read to their children, and if they do, they start way too late. Studies show a significant link to academic struggles and parents not reading to their young children. So, let's just say that a child who wasn't read to when he was a baby, one leg of his hat rack might just be less stable. In fact, that might make the other legs unstable as well. That might be significant, as maybe not even having that leg at all. So with two more of our legs being primary and secondary education respectively, or these eras of human development, you may see where I'm going. Primary would be kindergarten until somewhere around the beginning or before middle school. Secondary education really covers that 7th to 12th grade area, where this is an increase in rigor and higher order reasoning and critical thinking becomes more the focus in assignments. Many end up with those 3 legs and they try hanging their hats on their hat rack, and surprise when it's difficult to keep vertical. Again, I'm not suggesting anyone's intelligence isn't up to par. I'm saying we are only as educated as the institution educating us and our own efforts into that process. The way our education system is set up in America, it's difficult to argue we're setting our kids up to be successful societal contributors. Again, no knocking schools or teachers. It's a systematic issue in how this country, our society, views education and the role childcare plays economically, politically, culturally, and socially. It shouldn't be a political issue, but funding for schools, money, because it always comes down to money, is the center of conflict. And because America can't decide what kind of schools we should have and other arbitrary issues that bog down the actual teaching of children, in all of these areas, right, we suffer. You suffered because of it. I suffered. My daughters did. But it isn't about the teachers or principals who are putting themselves out there day in and day out. They're doing great. This is a philosophical idea that we can do better. It's just about agreeing on what better looks like. But understanding is so important that your early childhood and the schooling you get in the other periods of your development affect your perspective on each and every hat you wear or role you play in your life. So if you're thinking, well, earlier he said accountant, and I never really thought of it, but I do balance the books of the house. Then what is your foundation on budgeting or accounting? Only what you've been taught? So if you really haven't pursued any more information than that, how do you know you're doing it right or best? This is where that 4th leg, and I'm moving toward the well-rounded base, comes into play. Post-secondary education, which can be college, trade school, professional learning, really any advanced education that you receive beyond a high school diploma, would qualify for this. It's vital to have something like that in your arsenal. My father used to tell me, son, no matter what you do, learn something that'll guarantee you money. So with that 4th leg, you begin to see more and more stability, not only in the base, but in those arms. The entire hat rack itself, you're better prepared for the various roles you play the more you study and the more training you do. If you're always bouncing checks, doesn't it make sense that you'd eventually look into one of those Dave Ramsey classes? If you're stuck in a video game, you watch the tutorial. How many of us, before calling a plumber, has tried to watch how to do it on YouTube? I'm telling you, a dedication to learning isn't just sitting in a classroom cracking the books. All that is discipline. That's what college requires. Plus critical thinking skills, and if you're not encouraged to do that in those other legs, then you're ill-prepared for the college experience. Again, this isn't about intelligence, it's about academic layers of preparation. If middle school didn't prepare you for high school, you're going to struggle. This is about your learning environment and your history. Let me pose it to you this way. If I tried to teach you math, would you be stupid for not being able to do the maths that I taught? Or is it the fact that maybe I suck really bad at the maths more to blame? That sounds like an indictment on the teacher, and I don't mean it that way. I just mean that we're subject to the input, regardless of where it comes from, and the bias and the learning environments and histories of those input sources, be they human or otherwise. If I'm homeschooling my kid and trying to teach math and I suck at math, well, I couldn't teach you math is what I'm saying. And if I tried, I wouldn't be doing you any favors. Still, many teachers have to take on more and more, and kids today are facing more and more challenges than any generation before. So do you really think your kid is more focused in school than you were? They have a phone. We didn't. Where is their foundation? If mom and dad fought a lot, boy, they're behind the 8 ball, and statistically more likely to River Phoenix an 8 ball, incidentally. Therapy. It honestly shouldn't be a problem. It should be totally covered by insurance. We shouldn't be fighting about mental health at all. When we start talking about that well-rounded base, a foundation of learning that we can still be sure will handle many of the hats that we wear, we're talking about taking everything we've learned from all these legs of our journey and using those ideas to work with each other for the common goal of being the best, whatever our particular role is, rather than working against our own best interests. A well-rounded base comes from constant dedication to the idea that we do not know everything, having a curious and inquisitive nature about ourselves and the world around us, hungry to know. Oh, by the way, when your wife was pregnant, did she make you read a book on it? Congratulations! You're doing it. And that's how we get those strong arms and masterful hats, a broad, rounded base on which it all stands. It's really that simple. Learning is easy. Learning is reading a story online, not understanding a term and then Googling it, researching, finding the answers, not assuming, knowing for sure, whatever that is. What movie was Julia Roberts in with Nick Nolte? What was the guy's name who did the voice of Mr. Krabs? Who played the Incredible Hulk before Mark Ruffalo? These are all superficial, but the information you seek is out there. It's easier than ever to prove in less than 2 minutes whether a story you're reading is real or fake, whether it comes from a reliable source or a politically biased propaganda blog. There just isn't an excuse for not knowing in this day and age. So, these hats we wear, we filter the world around us through them, through those lenses of perspective. When something happens, our filters begin to process that data, that experience. How we react and deal with the event is not only filtered through our experiences, but how we deal with it can be traced right back to the human hat rack idea. We better hope we have that solid foundation. We all do this. When the stock market plunges, maybe we think wearing the parent, accountant, house manager hat is appropriate. How will this affect grocery and gas prices? For me, spending a few years in the automotive industry, when a friend is car shopping, well, my car salesman hat gets pulled from way underneath on the bottom, and immediately I go into help mode. But these hats, as I've said, are only as strong as the foundation on which they are racked, and only as strong as our dedication to continuing to learn about them. I'm constantly reading stories or articles because I want to be a good husband, a good person. It's really that simple. I don't like being wrong. Now, having said all that, this is where it might get a little prickly. I'm going to say something mean, but stick with me, please. Allow me, if you will, to defend my point. Those who demonize education usually don't have much of it and may have struggled or weren't successful in their own academic pursuits. A bold and possibly harsh sentiment, sure, but this is a hypothesis I've crafted over years of being on one side or another of an issue. I've heard many people talk about the cost and debt and some of the experiences. I've heard a few try and tell me they didn't get anything out of it because they aren't using the degree, but it's rare that I come across anyone who simply feels they didn't grow from the educational experience. To that end, I have a master's degree in teaching, and I'm licensed to teach grades 7 through 12 in a variety of subjects, including English language arts and writing, government, and public speaking. I'd like to earn endorsements and certifications in other areas as well, just for bragging rights, but those cost money, and I'm not teaching now. So technically, I'm not using my very expensive degree that isn't paying off profitably for me. However, I can't say I didn't grow from the experience in ways that I can't explain. College, as it stands, may not be for everyone, I agree. But higher education teaches you how to objectively research and justify your opinions, how to draw clear lines of logic, and appreciating differing perspectives and points of view. Ask an academe how many times they began on one position but altered it after due diligence. This is the greatest chasm between the ideologies I've found. A willingness to be wrong, and when wrong, the willingness and humility to not only admit it, but pursue the correct answer. How can we bridge this gap? I hope I'm not insulting anyone. I'm insulting a culture of hypocrisy. This is what I call that experience of, son, you grow up and go to college and make something of yourself, to, boy, you think you know everything because you's educated. And that paradox, the get out of this town, son, versus you're too good for home paradox. The acknowledgement of some bizarre validity in education, yet demonizing it at the same time. And I've been at the root of being harassed, abused, and insulted because I'm educated. Now, I have no problem whipping out my credentials. I've earned them. And by all accounts, in some areas, it makes me an expert, at least more than many. But I'm constantly learning. I'm also constantly trying to teach as well, just not in a social media app debate style setting. Still, I've had some pretty terrible things said to me about my education from people who lack the experience, perspective, or paper on the wall. And while I'm a big boy who can take it with a grain of salt, I also realize that this is symptomatic of a cultural phenomenon of not only willful ignorance, but celebrated ignorance. This cultism of proud willful ignorance. As a critical thinker, this is quite possibly the most socially frustrating aspect of our current culture. It begins with the generation before change. My generation cannot be the generation of change. We had our chance. We inched forward, but not enough. And our time is up. Our children? Possibly. Maybe their children. But it depends on us loosening our ideas of what education means and then having a system that is reflective of our ideals in what an educated society should be. Deeper reasoning, higher order critical thinking, research, debate, questioning, these should be staples of a thriving society. But we know this because they always have been. Show me a society that's thrived without it. I can show you many that have collapsed when these values dissipated or were demonized for too long. It begins with us appreciating learning again and making libraries great again. Making your teachers great again. Writing and research teachers would be separate from your literature teachers, and my reimagined Department of Education, I'm not even sure I'd have an American heading that cabinet position. Why would I? Show me somebody in America who's doing education right. No, we'll grab somebody from one of the countries that's academically beating our asses. But my ideas are too extreme, maybe even for me. It begins with teaching history and not his story. Take that however you want, religious or patriarchal. I probably mean it whichever way you can imagine. We need to focus on the researched and academically accurate facts about history, regardless of whose perspective wrote it, and present that as curriculum. Conjecture thereof could be an elective. We need to reward the trade skills and teach them. Every child should leave high school with an employable marketable skill, and their graduation should depend on a thesis-type paper. They don't need to decide a life path or a career field, but they should be able to choose a required marketable skill to master and also then pick a really big academic question to answer. At least it broadens them as a person. It's another leg on their foundation, maybe closer to that well-rounded base. Trade schools need to be integrated with our high schools, the way many are today, but more inclusive with more funding. And schools shouldn't be privatized because privatized fast food may work, but I don't want a franchised education for my kids, especially when it's franchised by a fairy tale. Ask me about religious schools. I wouldn't allow them, and any form of indoctrination would be eliminated from an education curriculum. A true separation of church and state as it should be. No pledges, no prayers, just learning. And when I talk about how my ideas are extreme, I'm not sure I don't believe in penalties for crossing those lines. Education for our children should be sacrosanct. We should be very wary of crossing lines of fact, holding standards that mean something. In my world, take a child to church before they're mentally developed an adult, you'd go to prison, period. I'm that serious. We should be that serious if we adhere to brain development science, understanding how influential and susceptible to suggestion small children are. It's grooming, like that or not. Here's one that's going to piss a lot of people off. Not a single person who has ever grown up in church as a child has genuinely or authentically believed in their religion, faith, or deity. They were never given the choice to believe genuinely or authentically. They were brought into it before their brains formed the essential components of decision-making, critical thinking, logic, and reasoning. Children who were brought up into a religion were brought into a cult regardless of what you call that cult. Those children exposed to and indoctrinated into a cult are abused victims of spiritual assault and narcissistic ideologies. Doesn't matter what your God or church is, this is a true fact about human brain science and cultism. The fact that we, as Americans, allow any religious institution to operate a school is an abomination and slap in the face to anyone who isn't mentally unstable. A religious education is not a real education, folks. Every facet of it is filtered through a veil of fairy tale, compromising everything that is taught at that institution. Everything that person experiences thereafter passes through that same corrupted filter. Their legs, arms, and the hats they wear infected with cultism. Again, in my utopia, public schools would get it right, and our entire education system would go from a for-profit debt generator to a function of the state to reward innovation and improvement to the greater good. What else are tax dollars supposed to do? In conversation, I hear many sentiments of, they shouldn't be teaching that in schools, or why aren't they teaching that in schools? It's the debate over the reach of the public school and just what the school should teach a child. Some parents reject the notion of teaching sex ed or Bible study in public schools. Some others feel like teaching personal accounting and changing a tire should be mandatory. Many schools offer business or auto shop classes for that sort of thing. In fact, high schools and even middle schools today offer more than ever before, despite heavy cuts and corrupt imbeciles in charge of it all. I'm saying there's even more we can do. Schools should be a direct funnel to the workforce, trade schools, colleges. If you aren't on this path, what is your plan? And after that, no matter what you choose, keep learning. We can spend quadrillion dollars on defense in preserving someone else's ideal of something else that is abstract. Or we could lead by example. And what no one seems to understand, we really can do both. Uphold actual freedom and democracy in places where people are suffering, and help ours at home, and improve our nation's middle class, lower class, and infrastructure. What if I told you we could be great for a change and not be corrupt? Not like bully and beast, but really lead, for real though. Not just like Kardashians, sexual assault, school shootings and shit, like medicine, science, and philosophy, space travel, and all of us living our best lives. and setting up the best futures for our planet and future generations. We should all be less selfish dicks tomorrow than we were today. We should step back and wonder what we can be again. Remember when Roddenberry did it? You talk about modern-day philosophers. Say what you will, but the Star Trek mythos is fascinating. In that world, we traveled the galaxy, but only after uniting as a world. One nation, one planet, one people. In that story, we didn't unite because we were attacked by aliens, but because a smarter and more experienced society of Stoics found us and found us worthy of passing along their technology. And truly, isn't that how we should be as a race of beings? Holding to higher standards than church and school shootings and roadside bombings? No war, no poverty, just progress, the greater good, for the greatest of goods. Somewhere along the line, we began arguing about evolution and we ceased evolving. Maybe we became too self-aware. Maybe we've got ego death. As humans, nationality will not matter one day soon, and our society needs to come together and find better ways of being for everyone. I'm for progress, moving forward, advancing for everyone. Remember my episode, The Progress of Board Games? It's like a tabletop board game. Why play at all if you never get a chance to roll the dice? If your turn never comes? This evolution begins with education. Learn a new language. Learn a new skill. Discover a new culture or nationality. Who cares how old you are? Take something you truly believe in, something you know you can't change your mind on. Then take the complete opposite perspective and write a paper, researching it all, about the opposing view just to justify it. You're not willing to. Hell, I barely am. But I dare you. You might just prove yourself wrong. I have, time and time and time again. Imagine a system that takes our children from start to finish and educates them in a full, well-rounded manner. Social, occupational, academic, practical. It's a SOAP philosophy, where from the earliest we can, our education system begins nurturing and enhancing the child's development with a focus on the whole child, with counselors, professionals running things, experts. To truly be the best you must assemble the best and brightest minds to help figure this out. But to truly educate our children, it's fantasy. To think our society could agree on that and see what was possible. No child left behind, but for real. Every child matters in the system. The system that helps them find their way. Now we're too busy being obsessed with children's genitals and what clothes they wear and how they cut their hair and what they call themselves and if they're gonna go to drag shows or not. Maybe one day we will evolve. Until then, we must take responsibility for learning. Require it of ourselves, of those around us. Insist on more, insist on better. Drive the conversation and drive it forward with facts. And let's try to do so in a kinder way. Be better than me. I'm trying. It's hard. Education in science, math, English, history, especially the social sciences, all of it, and continued learning through your life, regardless of how, a well-rounded base for our human hat racks. Be strong with the many roles you play today. Wear your many hats proudly and seek to learn something new about them this week. Disagree with my findings? Feel free to use the scientific method to disprove any of this. Coming up, I'm continuing with this sort of shift into self-help with a series of episodes on how we can better deal with stressful events and people. We're going to be peeling back our perspective layers, our hats as we've discussed, and look at things in maybe a different way than you're used to. Hopefully, it will help and help you be more forgiving of yourself and others. I'm breaking down the human mathematical equation. Next episode. We are the sum of all our parts after all. So I'm taking this idea of the human hat rack to the next level, exploring first how and why we react to these stressors the way we do, and then we'll discuss how we can better handle them. After that, an exploration into why we are sometimes those stressful events. These are hard conversations, but I'm glad we're having them. I'm glad you're along for the ride. My next few episodes are some of my favorites because I'm going to tell you how you can use soap to learn better and cups to help you deal with those people you really don't want to deal with. The human mathematical equation is next, followed by the cups method and the peril of perspective. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and catch up on past episodes of Overthinking Everything as I'm deconstructing a culture of cultism. Thanks for joining me. Check out some of my other videos on YouTube. I've got all my original music, clips from commercials, television, and movies that I've been in, my TikToks. It's all set aside in separate playlists for you for your convenience. Follow me on TikTok, like, share, and subscribe to this channel, and do all the things I need you to do. And if you like this series, consider a donation to Cash App or check out my merch store. Subscribe on Patreon. I'm everywhere. I'm Josh Brandon, and I'm overthinking everything.